this revenue source as a percentage of total revenues, this kind of says how careful you have to be with each revenue source. All funders think that they're giving you money and they deserve all your attention. But if somebody's only giving you 5%, then you should spend your time paying more attention to the sources. Let's say if there's federal programs giving you 25%, when they want a special report, you jump. If someone's only giving you 2 or 3% and they want a special report, maybe you take your time on that one. Now, if we're looking at revenues, we'll also look at your expenditures as well. Now, the reasons that you're going to look at your expenditures are simple, because we want to make sure that we're spending our money in a way that is most efficient and effective. One of the big measures of efficiency in public programs is that administrative overhead. Of every dollar you get in, how much money never leaves to go to the actual clients? In health insurance, for example, the average overhead is, let's say, 15 to 20%. And you can think of that as admin overhead. So of every dollar that comes into the insurance company, 15 or 20 cents never leaves the company. It doesn't go to hospitals, doctors, to pay for drugs, to pay for therapists, for anything like that. It stays inside the health insurance company. So you can think of that as, well, why did we pay all that? Because we wanted to take care of people, not pay administrators. The same is true in public health agencies. One of the big measures of your expenditures is how much is never leaving the admin offices. I've worked with some not-for-profits, for example, where this overhead was near 50%. In other words, and worse than that is these were donor-sponsored. So of every dollar that donors gave these charities, half of that was never getting to the people that they wanted it to get to. Now this one here, program expenditures as a percent of total expenditures, that just means where are you spending? Does 50% of your money go to immunization, or is it only 20%, and so forth? The reason that becomes kind of handy goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you compare yourself to your peers, in other words, you know that, let's say, 5% of your money is going towards, let's say, STD education, whereas other counties are spending 7%. So is your 5% too low, or are they too high? And again, hopefully you're getting the idea that these ratios themselves aren't that helpful, but they are helpful because they become tools to compare your own performance against peers to see if you are doing better or worse. For organizations that are honest enough to look at their own performance openly, this helps them see whether or not there are some best practices that they should adopt in terms of increased efficiency or more effective ways of spending their resources. Now, working our way through the other ratios, there are lots of workforce metrics which look at the efficiency of our work staff. Now, one of the extremely common measures in public health, we mentioned one earlier, which is revenue per capita. In other words, for all the 100,000 or 200,000 people in our assigned county, what's the total revenue per person? Another one is how many FTEs in our public health agency are we using per capita as well. Now, those two are metrics that counties nationwide use to compare themselves to one another. And then, as a check on where you're spending your money, you can also look at how much you're spending on people, basically, versus how much you're spending on supplies, on marketing buys, on your offices, on cars, on other things as well. Now, the next general heading you can use for your ratios is what they call mission metrics. And this is a little bit different, where the other ones are coming all from your financial statements. With mission metrics, a lot of times you start incorporating outcomes as well. I do a lot of research, for example, with maternal and child health. And one of the things that most public health agencies do is chart the percentage of preterm births or the percentage of low birth weight births. Now, that's an important health outcome, and again, incorporating other standards, there are national averages and state averages. So on things like health outcomes, those are things where you want to try to be ahead of your averages. And just like they showed here, you also want to show positive movement, in other words, movement in the right direction over time. Now, the reason they call that a mission metric is just that you could also call it outcome metrics, but we're not doing it we're not super focused on all potential health outcomes because there are lots of them. But every organization decides on what's the important ones, and that's kind of their mission. Another common outcome is looking at general health disparities, and even there it would have to be specific. Is it birth disparities? Is it life expectancy? Is it vaccination rates? Now, before I do leave this area, though, I like to make one note. Not everything is mission critical until it is. While water quality isn't very glamorous and is rarely considered a very important, super important mission thing because it doesn't get headlines, when it does get headlines, it becomes a mission thing. So that's just a quick little reminder that in public health, every little program has the potential to be important. Now, there's a bunch of demographic ratios as well, and you can think of these as ways that help you risk adjust your performance expectations. In other words, how many people do you have under age 18? What's the percentage under 18? What's the percentage over 65? That tells you about some of your potentially vulnerable populations. Speaking of populations with challenges, what percentage of your population is below the poverty line? And most importantly, perhaps, is what is the proportion uninsured? Now, having touched on the three questions above, this last one asks, what's your opinion? And well, that's your opinion, so I'll let you figure that one out. But for me, I've kind of already tipped my hand. The reason you do these financial assessments routinely is the same reason you do annual physicals. It's always better to identify problems earlier, and a lot of that ratio analysis is geared towards doing that, especially when we were looking at the trends. We're doing that not to spot when we go below a critical threshold, but to know when we're approaching it faster than we'd like to. Now, bringing all this together, you've got, because if you looked above, and the list above is actually the short list of ratios that you might use. There are scores of ratios that have been helpful in various settings. So with all of that, which ones are the important ones? Which ones are the key ones? Because humans really don't multitask well, it's best to limit the number of things that you're going to focus on. Just like a car dashboard, it's best to limit the number of dials and gauges you have to look at. The rule of thumb is 7 plus or minus 2, because more than that, and you're going to start missing critical information. Now, these performance indicators, which ones are quote-unquote key or critical to your organization, will vary. You want to look for the indicators that have in the past been most associated with your mission things. And let's say your mission is one of your first key mission things was the general health of the population. So you want to look at that trend analysis that we looked at earlier. You want to look at that trend analysis that compared a lot of your different ratios and compare those to your general health measures, and that's going to tell you which ones of those indicators of those ratios tracked closest to your health outcomes, because those are the ones you want to pay attention to. And then now that we've kind of tried to limit our focus to just those few key things, we can arrange them nicely on what they've called a dashboard. And then once it's on a dashboard, we can stop just looking at numbers, and we can put the ratios now on these nice graphs so that we can visually see how we're doing. It's the same reason that cars often have dials for things like tachometers or speed. They show how you're doing and as you go along, and they'll also show threshold levels. That would be like the warning light that tells you